To order, and Cindy Maynard, as you can see, is not able to attend tonight and has asked me to chair this meeting. So I will do that, not nearly as effectively as she does, but I'll do my best. So the second item on the agenda is agenda review, and we have at least one addition to our agenda. We will be adding order 18-16, and that is being passed out to you now. And we have a few other changes, but we'll make those as we go along. Third item is approval of the minutes of December 11th, 2017. Could I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
And a second?
Second?
Any questions, comments, corrections? All those in favor? Passes unanimously. We have several public hearings tonight, so we'll start with public hearing A. I think I'm supposed to do that. To consider a vitril's license for Global Montello's Group Corporation doing business as Alltown 103 Park Street. David?
Hi, good evening, folks. My name is Dave Milan. I'm the Director of Community Development, and staff has completed the necessary inspections and has made sure that all of the fees and taxes are paid, and they recommend approval of the license.
Are there any comments for or against this license? Or any questions for Dave? No comments for or against, then we will close public hearing A. Public hearing B, to consider a vitril's license for DMCP LLC doing business as Dunkin' Donut, 103 Park Street.
Staff has completed the inspections and confirms that the sewer fees and the personal property taxes are current and recommends approval of the license.
Any questions for Dave? Any comments from the public for or against this license? We'll close public hearing B. Public hearing C, to consider a Class 1A malt, spirituous, and vinous liquor license, special amusement permit for music, dancing, and entertainment, and vitril's license for University Inn Academic Suites, 5 College Avenue, Orono.
The staff has completed the inspections, confirms that sewer fees and personal property taxes are current, and recommends approval of the license.
Any questions on this license? Any comments from the public for or against this license? Hearing none, we will close public hearing C.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. We have a public hearing D on the agenda, but we're being asked to continue this until April 9th, 2016. 2018? Yes. Do we want to have a motion to table it until then? Could I have a motion to table this item until our April 9th meeting, 2018?
So moved.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any question? All those in favor? Unanimous. And now we go on to acknowledgements, and we're going to start down at Sam's end tonight.
I'd just like to acknowledge the great work of our Public Works by getting rid of a whole lot of snow on 2 lovely occasions, 2.5 including tonight. I think they did a great job, and I heard a lot of great positive feedback from the community, so I'd like to salute them.
Lori.
I'd like to salute our firefighters that saved a family from fire just after Christmas. So in addition to the amazing job they did clearing the roads on Christmas Day and clearing the sidewalks so that it was easy walking the very next morning and easy driving, they also saved a family from who unfortunately lost their home on, I think it was the 26th.
Right.
Was it 21st? Oh, okay, it's before Christmas.
Tom?
Happy New Year. I also want to commend the folks. We've had some pretty heavy-duty storms, and one thing I noticed is they at least got one lane open, even amidst the storm, so if somebody did need to come and fight a fire or whatever, it was a possibility.
Judy?
I got a chance to see the Wacker Newson go by my house, and I was very impressed. And I think that the neighborhood was very impressed too, because those sidewalks were cleared off pretty quickly, and it was walkable again, and people in my neighborhood love to walk. I'd also like to second Laurie's comment about Orono Police and Fire doing a great job with that family who lost their home a couple days before Christmas. And I'd also like to acknowledge the community in Orono. I mean, the outreach was incredible. People were donating to the point where the family had, you know, Christmas presents under the tree and food for their dog and everything that they needed within 24 hours. It was really incredible, and it made me very proud to live in this town.
It's great. Very well-deserved compliments for our public safety and public works folks over the last 2 weeks. I'd also like to acknowledge the passing of lifelong Orono resident Dean Anderson. Dean was I think a 1940 graduate of Orono High School, lived in Orono his entire life, died last week at 96. Served in the Marines immediately after high school for 4 years in World War II, participated in most of the battles, the major battles in the Pacific, and just a really, really nice man who'll be missed. On a happy note, I would like to acknowledge the work that Nancy Ward does. We just approved some minutes that she did. She does a remarkable job of organizing things for us, of getting minutes done, of getting agendas out, of responding to our questions, and I just appreciate so much the work that she does, and I know the rest of the council joins me in that. Okay, let us move on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions on the consent agenda? Anything that you want to take off? I'd just like to, for the public, mention 2 items on the consent agenda. One of our orders is approving a warrant for March 13th, 2018 for the annual municipal election, setting the hours of voting from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. in the polling place to be the town council chambers. I'd also like to mention an order changing the hours that the registrar will accept registration for applicants who appear in person as follows. On the last 5 days before March 13th annual municipal election from 8:30 to 4:30, and that again is here in this building. So we have an election coming up, and nomination papers for council are due this Friday, and please vote on the 13th of March. Take a vote on the consent agenda. All those in favor? None opposed? Unanimous. Okay. Moving on now to new business. We had no unfinished business, so we'll move on to new business. And under new business, we have Order 1811, an order accepting the State of Maine Bureau of Highway Safety Traffic Enforcement Grant for 2018, evidence-based impairing driving high visibility enforcement in an amount of $3,600 for dedicated overtime costs for the police to conduct impaired driving enforcement details. And Chief Ewing is going to speak to that.
Good evening, Josh Ewing with Police Chief. Each year the Bureau of Highway Safety puts out a series of grants. And this is the first that's been accepted from our agency that we've put in. But we've done each of these grants or all of these grants over the years. And the impaired driving campaign is the grant that we've submitted for. You'll see in the next couple of orders there. But this one's already been accepted. It's for $3,600, which is about 17 details, 4 or 6 hour details that the officers go out and specifically target impaired drivers. So it's a high visibility, stop a lot of cars, check drivers, and hopefully take those who are impaired off the road.
Could I have a motion on this item, please? Motion to approve. Second?
Second.
Okay, now, let's see if we have any questions for Chief Ewing on it. No questions? Although, oh, excuse me, Lori.
It's great that there's, you said there was a grant for this? And where's the grant from?
Bureau of Highway Safety, so they receive federal funds. Every state receives federal funds each year to target certain types of risks to drivers. And so that they then distribute those funds to, or offer those funds to agencies if they want to put in for the grants. So they fund all the overtime costs associated with the details.
And have you been funded for this before?
We have.
Well,
There's no match for these. The match is in kind for them. We submit the summonses for arrests, and they look at the value of what those summonses might be bringing to the state of Maine and consider that a match from the town.
Well,
Josh, if are we to assume that the amount of money that's allotted for each of these different procedures is, in other words, if we've got $10,000 and someone else has got $2,000, there's going to be more time spent on the $10,000 project than there would be on the $2,000 project? Possibly.
Can you rephrase that? We're going to
Well, for
spend,
example, there's 10,500 for, that's kind of being
Distracted
allotted
drive.
to distracted driving, which I
Correct.
personally see as a big issue.
right, so
So would you therefore be spending more police time on that process than for the $2,000 that's going to speed enforcement?
we will do the amount of details in overtime to reach each of those amounts. So yes, the state sees distracted driving right now as the primary concern.
I would say, looking at
They're
the,
seeing accidents have increased, the Heads Up campaign, DOT came here, they're coming to other communities and talking about more awareness and trying to increase safety for everybody. So these grants fall in line with all of that, and distracted driving is their hot button right now, and they'd like us to focus on that the most. They've allotted the most money for that for us, yes.
that's, okay.
Yeah.
So are the distracted driving, when you set up to do that, is that during the day or is that in overtime?
It's all, even overtime can be done during the day. It's primarily during the day, but we can do this at night as well. You can put officers in certain places where they can view drivers even at night.
So this is overtime because it's outside of what your
Regular
regular
duty.
duties are?
Yes, their specific job for those 4 or 6 hours is to target that violation without answering calls or without doing anything else.
any other questions? Are you ready for a vote?
No, I'm sorry, I still have questions.
Sure.
So how does the amount that Orno is getting per capita compare to other towns in Maine?
Great question. They actually, in the grant application process, they listed out what every town is getting. In many ways, it's based on accidents, previous summonses, speeding violations, that type of thing. So they allot what they feel is appropriate for your community based on the problem that they're seeing coming in for violations and for accidents.
Oh, so you don't write a proposal that says, we had this much problem last year and so we want.
We do have to write the proposal. In the past, it used to be that we would ask for a certain amount of money. They have changed in the last few years where they actually tell you this is the amount of money you can ask for. And each community has a different amount. They've kind of told us you can ask for less, but this is the most you can ask for.
We obviously ask for as much as we can get.
We do, and this is an ambitious, you'll see in these next orders, this is pretty ambitious, I
Yeah.
gotta tell you. I'm hoping that we can meet the demand for that many details.
Right. Any other questions on this item? Okay, let's have a vote on it. So all those in favor of Order 1811? And none opposed. I'm going to let you stay right there, I guess, Josh, because we're going on to Order 1812, order accepting the State of Maine Bureau of Highway Safety Traffic Enforcement Grant. And this outlines several different parts of that. $10,500 dedicated to overtime costs for police to conduct distracted driving, $2,668 for overtime costs for police to conduct speed enforcement details, and $3,100 for dedicated overtime costs for law enforcement participation in the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration Click It or Ticket campaign.
So the distracted driving is exactly what it says. We are specifically targeting distracted drivers townwide, and they are details that can be 2 officers, 4 or 6 hours, and they're going out and trying to catch people on their phones, or doing other things that obviously just take them away from their focus of driving. The speed enforcement details are exactly what they sound like. Just go out, use radar, and catch people who are exceeding the speed limit. The Click It or Ticket is the one you see each year that comes out in May. It's a 2-week period. It's a national campaign. Everybody does it during the same time period, and it is 100% to target those that are people that are unbuckled to increase occupant safety. So that is a specific time frame. It's 2 weeks in May. In fact, the other two, distracted driving and speed, are from this point forward anytime between now and September 15th for those details.
Questions on this item? Let me have a motion first, if I could, please. Motion to approve Order 1812.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you.
Let's see how it's going to be, Megan.
I'm playing the role of, I don't know, you or Tom tonight, I'm not sure.
Now we'll take any questions that folks have for Josh. Any questions? We all set? All those in favor of Order 1812? Unanimous. Thank you, Josh.
Very much.
Order 1813, order proclaiming the month of March as Science Month in the town of Orono. And do we turn to our town manager for this item?
Well, Kate Dickerson from the Maine Science Festival is here. So she can start.
While she's getting organized, can I have a motion for approval of this item, then we'll have our presentation and discussion.
So moved?
Motion has been made and seconded.
Hi, I'm Kate Dickerson. I am the founder and director of the Maine Science Festival. I really appreciate time on the agenda this evening. Just a very quick background. The Maine Science Festival was born out of a New York Times article in 2012 that I read, and went from a guy who's a gentleman who champions science festivals. I thought, this is great, my son would love this. I said, Maine should have one, and I instantly went to, well, of course I should do it. And I honestly still don't know why that happened. But I'm immensely grateful that Orono is choosing to proclaim March Science Festival Month. We chose March as the month for our science festival, so it's now a 4-day celebration of the science that happens in Maine. It is not a science fair, it is not a science lecture, it is not a science class. It is workshops and hands-on activities and forums and films and exhibits. In the first 3 years of our festival, our first festival was in 2015. In these 3 years, we've had 30,000 people come to Bangor to talk about science or celebrate science or learn about science. And one of my proudest moments is when my retired English teacher mother told me she couldn't figure out which event she wanted to go to because there were too many to pick from. And this is from the woman who, declared her absolute fear and loathing of anything science and math, so I figured that was quite an accomplishment. I literally could go on for hours and hours, and no one wants that. I will just say very quickly, what we try to do at this festival is highlight all of the amazing things happening in Maine on a daily basis, and Orono is in many ways the hot spot for that. It is stunning, as someone who did not grow up here, who is affiliated by marriage to the University of Maine, and when I worked there, the amount of research and science and engineering and innovation that happens there that people do not know about, all to the detriment of the state. So anything that we can do to talk about what happens literally just down the road from this building, and that Orono houses to innovate and to create economic development and genuine knowledge for the state and for the country and for the world, I think is a really great thing. So I'm immensely grateful that you are taking just a little bit of time today to talk about that. I would urge you to please come to the festival. Our program will be up online by the end of the month. We have 60 events and activities for all ages. That includes 21+ events and bars, down to science shows for kids. We run this festival for free. That's the other key part of this. I don't charge for it. We don't think science that happens in Maine should come with a ticket price for people to be inspired by it. The only thing we charge for is our headliner event, and that's the only theoretically non-main event of it, so we bring in a nationally known person. This year we're bringing in Robert Krulwich from Radiolab, so he'll be talking about what it is that he does that makes science so inviting. But while he's a headliner, I think the real showstopper for the weekend, for those 4 days, is the science that's happening in Maine. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I can get, my contact information is on the website. I literally could spend hours on this, so if you really want to know more, just give me a call or email. I'll treat you to more than you want to know. So, thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Questions or comments from committee members?
Bill just has another Orono tie-in.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
So I've never met Kate face-to-face, but we have exchanged many emails. The Bangor Area Stormwater Group, of which Orono is a part, has been using the Science Festival as its public outreach. We did it last year. We're going to do it again this year. And it has been a fantastic way for the group to get information about the science out to young kids, and at the same time talk to their parents about the importance of limiting their use of lawn chemicals. So it's a great opportunity for people to talk and explore science, so and we're doing it.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Any questions or comments?
Just a quick comment. I think that it's wonderful to draw attention to the sciences and you know, especially with our connection to the university and what's going on there. Also, for my involvement in Downtown Bangor Humanities Day, a lot of young folks, children and high school students from Orono participate in these Downtown Bangor festivals, and I think it's just wonderful, just one more bit of outreach to inspire and encourage kids.
Thanks, Megan. Any other comments?
I'm looking forward to see Mr. Krolwich, even though he looks nothing like what he sounds like on Radio Lab.
You're right, he doesn't. The actual proclamation we're approving was included in our material, so I hope everyone's had a chance to read it. Very nicely done. Ready for vote? All those in favor of Order 1814 adopting, Order 1813, adopting a proclamation proclaiming the month of March Science Month in the town of Orono. All those in favor? Any opposed? No. So we are moving on to Order 1814. In Order 1814 is an order adopting a revision to the town of Orono's financial policies, Section G, related to the use of undesignated fund balance, and that is going to our town manager.
You notice I don't get the fun stuff.
No.
So the issue of our fund balance policy came up during the FY18 budget process, and council asked me to take a look at the current policy and make some suggestions. And I think the issue that had come up is that the original policy was adopted in 2006 when the town was not only comprised of our the municipal budget, but also the school budget. And right now, we have only the municipal budget with a net school assessment. So instead of a $20 million school budget, we have a $6.5 million school assessment. And I think a concern was raised that we didn't want to keep too much money in our undesignated fund. So we didn't want to be taxing people money that we didn't have to. So I went back and pulled the fund balance policy, and I passed out at the very beginning of the meeting a piece of paper front and back that talked about the numbers around the policy. And so we talked at the Council Finance Committee about this. Did it get stalled out somewhere along the way?
Oh, sorry about that.
Sorry. Well, clearly, we only want this half of council to have the information. So the way the fund balance policy works, when we talk about unassigned fund balance or undesignated fund balance, by policy, we have said that we will have at least 11% of the expense budget held in reserve, in unassigned reserve. We then went on and floated 2 different sets of bonds that, in the prospectus for those bonds, we said that we would keep between 11 and 15% of the undesignated fund held in reserve for an emergency. And I think from the bond perspective, what they're talking about is not just the catastrophic infrastructure failure or something of that nature, but also if revenues weren't coming in, they want to make sure that they would still get repaid their bond payment in a timely fashion. So the question, so using the formula that we have used in the past, 11% of fund balance holding it would be about $1.8 million, which would leave us about $237,000 of unassigned fund balance. 15% would be almost 2.5 million, and we would be in the hole. So according to the policy, I would be coming back to you with a plan to add $422,000 to the unassigned fund balance. So the discussion that we had was we really can't change the 11% and 15%, that target 11 to 15%, without having to go back and, well, we made a promise to the lenders, so. But there, when you look at the expense budget, there are many different ways we could look at the expense budget, and that was not defined in the prospectus. So at the council committee meeting, I kind of laid out 6 potential options, and they range from the most conservative of the entire expense budget as it's posted on the operating financial statements, which includes all of our expenses, school, and carry forward funds. So anything that we are saying that we can spend, is on there, and that's an increase of about $3 million from what was originally budgeted, adopted by council. And that would leave us in a hole at 11%, all the way up to almost $900,000 in the hole at 15%. So the committee was very quickly decided that more conservative was not where they wanted to go. We then looked at the current budget less the school assessment, because that is what was discussed at the workshop. And pretty quickly, the committee kind of set that aside, because we still owe the $6.5 million. If we don't collect any revenue, we still owe that $6.5 million. Then we started looking at, well, our expenses include money from our fund balance that we, some expenses that have been approved include an offset to be paid for through fund balance that we already have. So why would we assign fund balance to cover that? So as an example, we have $488,000 worth of fund balance, assigned fund balance, that we said we're going to use this year for the debt payment for the economic development bond that dates way back. And so for us to then allocate a percentage of that to hold in reserve for money that we already have doesn't make a lot of sense. So we started there, and then we said, well, what about if we look at the other items that aren't necessarily an obligation that council can't very quickly absolve itself of. And so we looked at the total expense budget less fund balance and the TIF expenditures that are listed on commitment, because council could dissolve TIF districts and not make those expenditures. and it's an inter-fund expense. We're paying ourselves. It just goes into a different fund. And overlay, because there are no expenses associated with overlay. And that changed it to $360,000 worth of fund balance using this year's budget that has already been adopted, and a deficit at 15% of $255,000. So the last piece that we looked at was council has been doing a really good job of looking ahead and assigning fund balance for anticipated future needs. It allows us to try to keep a steady draw on our capital budget, but it does mean that we're putting money aside this year for an ambulance for next year. And when we started to look at the assigned fund balance, we thought, while it is all assigned, there is a significant amount of it that is discretionary. So if the town was suddenly in financial straits, council could make a decision to reassign a significant portion of our assigned fund balance to reassign it as unassigned. How's that? But we didn't want to do all of it because the whole purpose of this fund balance is to give us the cushion if something bad happens, if revenues don't come in as they've been projected, if we have catastrophic damage to something. And so you want those funds, you want to have funds there. So where we kind of were settling on was the idea that with an affirmative vote of council, you could consider using 25% of the assigned fund balance in your calculation for what to hold in the unassigned fund. I hope I'm making some sense, but it's the other thing that we decided to do since we were digging into this policy is that, council has the right to make decisions to not follow its own policy, but we thought it would be probably pretty important if we're in it anyway to change the policy to reflect the practice, which back in 2006, the decision was made by council that they would not use undesignated fund balance for the purpose of tax relief. Since I've been here, and through at least one manager before me, so I went back into her work as well, council has consistently utilized undesignated funds as general tax relief. Anywhere from $200,000 a year to this year we had $467,000. And, you run the risk when you do that. We have created a $467,000 structural gap in our budget. And I think for the last few years we have tried to ratchet it back. But at some point we're going to hit, if we continue to take $400,000 a year out. This year it really came out. There was a time when we'd say we were going to spend $200,000 and we'd put $200,000 back. We have cut the budget so tight and anticipated maximized our revenues. So when we say we're going to take 400 out, we take 400 out. So, I think that's something council might want to look at. But this revision is a draft, and it's here for your consideration. I tried to represent the discussion that the Finance Committee had.
So I guess an opportunity for comments or questions on this particular revision. I guess I'd like to start just by making sure that everybody understands. I know council members do, but the general public may not. Our town is in very good financial shape. We're only talking about the way in which we use reserve funds and how we calculate the amount of reserve funds we need to have. So with that introduction, questions or comments?
I'll make a comment because I went to it was my first finance committee meeting, and so the beginning discussion here is this between 11 and 15%. We have creditors is it banks that wanted, that we signed an agreement that said that we had to?
So so we float our own bonds, and when we float the bond, the town is required to put together and sign a prospectus that lays out what we say we're going to do. And as part of that prospectus on, let's see, we've got 2.8, 18 million dollars, I would say, total. We have said we're going to keep 11 to 15%.
And would you define floating a bond?
So when the town needs to borrow money, we do not tend to go to a typical lender. Instead, we go through the process of telling the world that we need money, giving them the perspective of what we need it for, and telling them about our town. And then people bid on them, and whoever comes in with the lowest interest rate at the best terms, we accept. So last time we did this, we refinanced a ton of money, and we got $17 million, and for that we've agreed to pay them on a particular schedule. What's important to understand is that while the council agreed to do it, the backing or the collateral for that is the full faith and credit of the taxpayers of the town of Orono. So it's everybody's assets that live in the town of Orono have done that. So have I made sense?
Yeah, so floating a bond, that's what that means. But, so when we started the finance committee meeting, you said, we have this agreement that we'd put aside 11 to 15%, but that in those documents, 11 to 15% of what is not clearly defined. And so all of these options that you've been describing are the ways in which you could define that when looking at the budget.
Those are ways that I think you can define it. Ultimately, council has to agree with it if we put it in the policy.
Okay, I appreciate you just clarifying that, and I'm impressed at the level of detail and the way you've described it. Thank you very much. And as far as the second part, it seems that it's a great idea to change our policies as written to reflect our practice. And so that second part, which is what do we use these monies for, I am completely in support of that. And so we're not voting on this now. We're going to review this now and vote on it at a future date.
That's up to council.
That's a choice that we have. This has been reviewed by the finance committee, and we recommended it. But this is the first time other council members have seen it, and we want to be sure that people are comfortable with it.
Okay. I have a couple of questions on I think what is the second page. It doesn't have all the details, but just the amount for FY 18.
Yep.
And it says 11% and 15%. And if I look at the first one, it's 16.5 million. And farther down, there's one that's 13 million.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 11%, on one of them it says $237,000, and the other one says 613. And in the middle between those, there's a negative. So
yeah,
I don't quite understand.
No,
because that
so
doesn't look like 11% to me. So
I'm going to say the 613 is off, Tom, and I apologize for that. The 237 I know is correct, and the 227 and the 2 that we have at the bottom, the 613, I think that's my typo. I'm going to guess it was more like 213, but I am not. I have not done the math right sitting here now that you bring it up.
Because, well, it's got to be. I mean, maybe it's your Excel spreadsheet, but the 15% is 89,000, so that doesn't make any sense either.
No, I've got an error, and
something slipped on you.
Yep.
Okay. So let's just look at the one above that. So why are these negative numbers in here?
So you can only, so we're talking about how much of fund balance if I set aside 11% of the 19.6 million.
Okay.
And 11% of the 19.6 million is more than the 2 million that we have in undesignated funds.
Than we currently have. Okay.
Yep. And so based on the policy as written or as revised, if that was the case, instead of coming and saying we can take money out, I would have to, as part of my budget, come with a plan to add money to the undesignated fund.
So that's 11% minus what we already have, or plus what we already have.
So that is 11% of the expense budget as defined on that line,
Okay.
subtracted from the current undesignated fund balance.
These are what's left over.
Yep.
Okay. Or not there at all.
Yep.
Okay. That makes more sense now.
Other questions or comments?
Originally, which I didn't realize, that, from in the 2006, it stated specifically that undesignated fund balance may not be used for general tax reduction, which, since I've been on council, we've been doing that. And I think many of us as council have expressed concern about us doing that. So is this policy going to force us to be much more judicious in the use of this fund balance or not? Or less judicious? Gives us more freedom.
So council's going to be as judicious as you wish to be.
So when we made this, when we borrowed the money that we borrowed, and we made our commitment that we would, at that time, did we have these formulas where we were taking out this didn't count and this didn't count and this didn't count? No. So did we make a commitment or a promise, kind of, to these banking institutions that we would have more money than we're going to be having?
I don't think so, Judy. Because if you look, our assigned fund balance is significantly higher. Our assigned fund balance is significantly higher than it was when we made these initial. It's less than it was last year, but it's higher. We have put funds aside for purposes which council has agreed to, but when you look at the total, when I got here, the entire fund balance was about $2 million different, more, but pieces of that, we had a huge chunk of that that was non-spendable. It was a receivable for the OEDC grant or the Economic Development Grant. So we're actually in a better financial position when you consider that we have assigned all of the balance of the loan for the Economic Development Bond. So I think I think council can do what it wants. I think it's 100% a policy decision whether you open it up, which you would be doing with this. If you change the policy, you would be giving yourself more room to work within the use of unassigned fund balance. And one of the discussions that we had at the committee meeting is that although, and I think Councilor Perry brought it up, although we call it the use of fund balance for general property tax relief, that at the end of the day, you could tie that in with our capital budget very easily, which would then meet the spirit of the current policy as written. So, I think it's a discussion that is worth council having about where it wants to be, and if you want to open this up for future councils to have more discretion.
So could you repeat again for me and for people listening, your comments about what our use of this fund as we've been using it over the past few years, why it's put us, there's a certain precariousness to this, that we've actually we have a budget shortfall, and we've been filling it, the gap, with the use of this undesignated fund. And many of us have, expressed concern that, because what we're really doing is spending more than we're bringing in. If it was my budget at home, I'd be digging a hole for myself. So how do we prevent digging that hole? Because at some point in time, I fear that it may come back. Are there any restrictions on the hole?
So can I take a shot at it?
Thanks.
I'm not sure I see it as a budget hole. I see it as a desire on the part of the council to not increase taxes as much as would be necessary to support the budget that we approved. Okay, we've made a decision just this past year that we're going to increase taxes a limited amount, and in order to do that, we took from our undesignated reserve and use some of that money. Now, the two ways you stop doing that are you reduce your expenditure or you raise taxes more. So I think those are the choices that face us each year.
But Tom, do we reach a point where, in an attempt to keep taxes stable and not to reduce expenses, is that sustainable over time? Are we going to reach a point where? That's my question.
Yeah, I think the answer is we could. We don't know. We don't know how our tax base is going to grow and change or decrease, and we always are testing what our public is saying about the level of taxes. And I think most of us agree that the taxes in Orono are very high, and we wish they weren't.
I think one way to answer your question about the sustainability, Judy, is to look at trends. So last year, we added $113,000 to the undesignated fund at the end of 2016. At the end of 2017, we decreased the undesignated fund in the neighborhood of $400,000. So if I were a counselor, I would be looking at next year, when we get to the budget time, the discussion about, do we think we're going to use it? Do we think we're not going to use it? Where's our projection? And if we come in again with a negative, we think we're going to use it all, then we probably should start looking at backing off, because $2 million sounds like a lot of money until you're taking $400,000 at a time out of it. But I do agree that there's a balance to be had. And I don't think we want to be a community that overtaxes our people to pad our reserves.
I would agree with that.
And so I think it's about finding the balance. And I also think that where we are right now is such that if we were going to try to wean ourselves off the use of the undesignated fund, the way to do that would be to do it piecemeal, to do it a little bit at a time. And I think in order to be able to do that effectively, you probably need to make a change to your policy to allow us to do that. That's just...
So this policy, besides the ones that you've already suggested? No, make the changes that you've suggested would allow us...
Not me, the committee. I want to just be clear. Yeah, I do, because I don't think that we can go from using $400,000 to not using it without considerable pain to the community, all in one fell swoop. I think we should see what our projections look like when we get to budget time, and then start making effort to either say, yes, if we're gonna add a whole bunch, then we should maybe use the fund balance. If we're going to see another year where we're going to take a significant amount out, then maybe we should talk about beginning to wean that down a little more. Just a thought, but ultimately you guys are the ones that make the decision.
So, but we're not falling below 11%. We have not fallen below 11% even by taking out the 400.
No.
Correct.
Nope.
So we have a minimum target, and we're meeting that. And so we're looking at what money we have above that at the time that we're setting the tax rate.
Correct.
So that, just so it's clear. And so it's kind of saying whatever we saved the previous year, maybe oil was cheaper than we had projected. I mean, there could be any number of things, so it's, that's one of the reasons I've always voted for it, because I thought, okay, we've had a savings on our budget. There is no reason not to give the taxpayer a break, because we did a good job.
I'd also just sort of like to summarize that, I mean, echoing some of the things that have been said, we're not going to just stop doing this next year, and so our policy should reflect our practice. I think that that's just a good way to operate. However, I also want to highlight and point out that the committee also recommended that there would be sort of a warning embedded in this policy. And it comes in the form of, in the final paragraph, use of undesignated fund balance. It says, council shall consider the structural deficit created in the budget by the use of the undesignated fund balance to offset the cost of ongoing general operating expenses and work toward limiting the use of the fund in this manner. So what we're saying by revising this policy is we probably realistically are going to continue this practice. We should have the policy reflect the practice that we're actually engaged in, but at the same time, we are putting sort of a warning in there that to future councils that this is not something that we should continue.
Yep, good.
And is it, one of the wording that was struck out was a balance of no, and it said originally of no less than. Now we're down to a balance of 11. Is there a reason not to continue with a no less than?
Because I changed the language, has established a minimum undesignated fund balance of 11%. So a minimum and no less than would.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't read that.
That's
that
okay.
above sentence, excuse me. Thank you.
That's fine.
Any other questions? Is this an item that we're ready to vote on, or is this something that folks want to spend some time thinking about and come back to?
I'm comfortable with it, with hearing the report of the committee as well.
Okay. So would somebody like to make a motion?
Yeah.
Move approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? All in favor. Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Order 1815, an order accepting the FY17 Town of Orono financial audit. I'm going to ask for a motion to table this item until our meeting next month. We discussed the audit in the Finance Committee. We felt that it would be important, although there were no significant issues in the audit and we are in good financial shape, to have the auditors actually meet with the entire council before we took action on it. So Sophie is scheduling that meeting in the near future, and we will not take action on the audit until after that takes place. So could I have a motion to table order 1815? Moved.
So moved, and also appreciate the effort to table it for that reason. Thank you.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? It has been tabled. And item 9 is presentation, brief presentation of the highlights of the audit, just to give us enough information so that we can intelligently ask questions when we meet with the auditors. No, I'm sorry, I missed an item, and thank you. The order that has been added to the agenda is Order 1816, order authorizing the town manager to execute an agreement with the University of Maine to complete a sanitary sewer evaluation study required as a condition of the town's CSO master plan and approved by Maine DEP.
So I'm actually going to start that, and as Joe walks through, say, Joe thanks you for letting him get out of here before my audit presentation.
Before we get started, Nancy's telling me we need to have a motion to add this item to the agenda. So Sam has made that motion. Megan has seconded it. We're going to vote in favor of just adding the motion to the agenda. So all those in favor? It has been added. Now let's have a motion to approve the order, and then we'll have discussion on it. So move to approve?
So moved.
Second.
I'm on a roll.
Oh, nice. You guys are being kind. Any discussion on, no, we're going to have the discussion first. So Joe.
Want me to start, Joe, or are you happy to take it?
I'm just gonna try to explain what the SSES even is. So you better start out, probably.
Start and then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the CSO master plan is the plan that we are required to submit to the state of Maine every 5 years because we have a pipe that goes from our plant, our sewer plant, to the river. A CSO is a combined sewer overflow. So the purpose of that pipe is to ensure that when there is too much flow coming into the plant, it goes out to the river.
As opposed to damaging our equipment in our
Yes.
plant.
Right,
Yes.
or washing out the biomass, or...
So we are on year 5 of our CSO master plan, and Joe and staff have done a remarkable job as we have worked to get the renewal for that, and we just got word this month that our wastewater discharge license has been renewed for 5 years as well. So as part of that, we had to submit the next CSO master plan. And one of the things we had to explain in the plan for the next 5 years is why we did not complete an SSES study that had been listed in the last round's CSO master plan. So I've learned a lot about SSES, but what I've learned most is that Joe knows a whole lot more than I do. So
SSES is Sanitary Sewer Evaluation Study.
Yes.
Okay.
So you've learned something, too. So I just typically, I think a sanitary sewer evaluation study involves cleaning the pipes, running the sewer camera through, and so that you can evaluate the condition of the pipes all the time. You're looking for water coming through infiltrating. And so there's about 10,000 feet up on campus that our engineers have identified as having, it's the same age as our stuff. I mean, it's all put in the 20s. So ours leaks, theirs got to.
So not only does it have to, but we have meters that measure the outflow from the main campus lines into our system. And we see the same spikes on campus during a rain event or wet weather conditions that would tell us that they are experiencing the same types of infiltration, I&I, that we would be. The other thing is that as part of the CSO master plan, I don't know how sharp your memories are today, but we put aside $7,500 for us to do wet weather and dry weather studies as a part of preparing for this renewal. And as part of that, our engineer was actually up on campus lifting manholes with UMaine staff and saw things that led him to conclude that there is some significant I&I on campus. Infiltration and
inflow.
There we go. Joe has worked, in his tenure as superintendent, has worked very hard to build even stronger relationships with operational and capital facilities people up on campus. And so we are ahead of where we were 5 years ago. But when we went in and we asked the university, because we had originally estimated that the SSES was going to cost us $50,000, and we had put aside, and council had approved $25,000 for the town to pay as a match to the university, putting in $25,000. It did not go through the university budgeting process. And quite honestly, there were higher priorities from the town in terms of funding that we needed for the Rangeley Road roundabout and some other things. So we kind of let it slide a little bit down. And we had sent the letter, the email back that we received from the university saying that the $25,000 had been cut from their budget to DEP and never heard anything formally from them. And so, barring any formal communication, our thought was, like other regulatory agencies, they understand that we put it in, we asked for the assistance and didn't get it, and so we're going to move it ahead. And, when the new CSO plan went to DEP, the draft for review, DEP has a new CSO master plan coordinator who looks at things differently than our previous regulators did. Yeah. Okay. And so he immediately took exception to the fact that our engineer had said that there's a I&I problem on campus, and campus's consultant said there is no problem. And DEP stepped in and started to try to regulate the University of Maine. I then stepped in because we have worked so hard to build a strong and positive relationship with the University of Maine. And I was very concerned about the tone that the discussions were going in. And Joe and I had some conversations with DEP. They started out very tense, but I think we're in good shape now. DEP has allowed the town to step back in and take the lead. They have, they will support our application for $15,000 in state planning funds for the SSES study. We have gone up on campus and met with the facilities folks up there and let them know that we need to have a signed agreement between the town and the university by the end of this month to get DEP to not call it a violation and get us all in trouble. Because the university has been adamant that they do not believe that there's a problem and their consultant says that there's not a problem, the tact that I have taken is, you don't believe there's a problem. Our consultant believes there is a problem. DEP is now saying the only way to understand if there's a problem or not is to have a study done. That study, Joe estimates, is about $65,000.
$60,000.
$60,000. Our proposal has been, if we fund the SSES study, the town does, the university conducts the study, the town has to be a party to the contract because it's the only way we can use the grant funds. But at the end, if they identify inflow and infiltration issues, that the university, as part of this agreement, will come up with a 5-year plan to address their problems on campus. So when I look at fighting about when you can afford it or how much you can afford versus here's the scope of work, this is how much it's going to cost, the town will apply for $15,000, spend $45,000 for the SSES study, and then the university will commit as part of this agreement to either refund the $45,000 or put, if there's a problem that's found, or give us a 5-year plan for how they plan to fix the problem. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to reduce our inflow and infiltration to the point that when we have a storm, we are not flowing into the river. I mean, ultimately, that's the goal.
The fix is on them, if there's a fix to be had.
Yes.
Yes.
Did you say that they were going to conduct the study, however?
So we would have to agree to the scope of work, and right now Their consultant is working with our consultant to define the scope of work for the SSES. That scope would be attached to the contract. As part of the agreement, DEP would have to approve the scope before we ever start. But I don't want to be the only party to that contract, because I'm working on somebody else's equipment that dates back to the 1920s that could easily be damaged. I don't want to be running that show. I want the university to run the show and the town to be part of, a third party on the contract.
You wouldn't have an independent party do that? I mean, if you already have our consulting saying one thing and the university consulting saying the opposite, why would we give up and let them who already say there isn't a problem? Why wouldn't you have a third party come in?
So you're going to have a third party come in because it's a contracted service to begin with, and there really are only two groups, and it's like a Ted Berry type.
Right.
There aren't very many contractors that can do this at this level. So they're people who, quite honestly, Judy, their reputation and...
So we're talking consultants, you're not talking about the people who actually are going to do the study. Is that what you're saying?
The people that are actually gonna do the study would be the consultant, Judy.
From the university?
No.
Oh.
No, from outside. The new university has no one that
That's
can
what I'm
handle this
asking.
either.
That's what I'm asking. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So, a point of clarification, we don't own the sewer pipes, those belong to the university.
That's correct.
We just accept their waste, okay.
And what percent of the waste is from the university that we process?
We down to like 48?
48%.
I think it's 48 if we both agree.
So we're going to come up initially with $45,000 of this money. Where is that coming from?
That would come from the Sewer Infrastructure Reserve account, which has adequate funding to handle that. It's $20,000 more than we had originally earmarked for this work, but I think it will pay the dividend on the other side. And one of my main concerns is I want to position ourselves so we're not in a fight later to have the work accomplished, because once DEP sees that there's an issue there, if it doesn't get fixed, that will cause a lot of heartburn.
Good. Other questions? So we had a motion to approve this, Nancy?
Yes.
We had a motion to approve Order 1816. Yep.
I just want to make sure that.
If there are no other questions, we'll
Questions answered?
call for a vote. Any other questions? Okay, then let's vote on 1816. All those in favor? Unanimous approval.
Just want to recognize the work that Joe has done on this, and the fact that we're able to be in this position is really a testament to the his good work building rapport with the university.
Not surprising. Okay, now we're moving on to the item 10, presentation, FY17 Town of Orono Financial Audit.
So it doesn't say brief on the agenda, but I'm going to try very hard to keep it brief.
I said brief, though.
I think you did. So first I want to start with my goal. I thought about creating slides, and my concern in creating slides for this presentation is that council would really get pulled into the numbers. And quite honestly, you have all the numbers in the books that were left for you today. I want to try to set it up so it's easier for you to read and understand what the books say. Does that make some sense? So when you look at the books, the thickest book is the financial statements, the audited financial statements. And it's important for you, you pick on me often because I once said that we had two sets of books. And what I meant by that, and I still mean it, is we have one set of books, but we report it in multiple ways. So as you go through the audit, you are going to see numbers that appear at first glance to be two different numbers for the same thing. But really, when we report on a government-wide basis, we use a different measuring tool and a different theory of a different accounting method than we do when we report for just the government fund. So when we look government-wide, we are using an economic resource measurement focus and the accrual method of accounting. And what that means is that revenue is recorded when it's earned, not necessarily, and that most often is before it is actually received. And expenses are recorded when they are incurred, regardless of the cash flow. So, so property taxes are recorded as a revenue for the year that they're levied. So last year we levied $12 million in property taxes. We didn't collect them all, but the day we levied them, we showed on the books $12 million of revenue. Grants are recorded, grant revenue is recorded as soon as all of our eligibility requirements are met. So, for example, when Josh meets the eligibility requirements in the Bureau of Highway Safety grants that you just accepted, he will bill them out, and the minute he bills those out, we recognize that as revenue received. The government fund is reported using current financial resource measurements and modified accrual base of accounting. So this means that revenues are recognized as soon as they are both measurable and available. So under this method, property taxes, interest, and charges for services are recognized as revenue as you would in the accrual basis, but everything else is recognized when it comes through the door as actual cash in. Expenditures are recorded when they are incurred, just like the accrual method. However, debt service, compensated absences are not characterized as expenses until they're actually expended. So we have the expense today. Somebody earns an hour of vacation time today. That's a liability that the town holds that would not show up on the audit. When we report on the government fund, it would not show up on the audit as an expense. It's still a liability, but it's not an expense. Am I making any sense? Okay. So the town has a primary operating fund, which we all call the general fund, and everything that we have, unless it's reported in a separate fund on the audit, is considered part of the general fund. Our other major fund is an enterprise fund. In the audit, it's listed as a business type activity, and that is the sewer, the WPCF. So net position, you will see in statement 1 of the financial in the audit, it talks about net position. And net position are all of our assets plus all of our deferred outflows of resources, so resources that will go out the door but haven't yet, minus all of our liabilities and deferred inflow of resources, so resources that have not come in the door yet. For Orono, we have a general fund net position of $11.4 million, which is about $423,000 less than it was last year. Our WPCF has a net position of $5.5 million, which is $200,000 less than it was last year. So when we think of what assets are, we're talking about adding up all of our land, our buildings, and the improvements, machinery, equipment, and infrastructure, subtracting the debt, all of our cash would be part of that as well, minus all of the debt that was used to acquire those items that is still outstanding, and then adding back in any unspent bond proceeds. So if we borrowed $2 million for a project and we had only spent $1 million at year end, you'd add that $1 million back into your net position. So right now, when you think about cash versus not cash, 39.8% of our current net position is available to meet our obligations. That has decreased, the net has decreased a total of $603,000 through all funds. So that's townwide. So when we think about our revenue and our expenses, our revenue is actually up 6.6% over last year. We had $16.1 million of revenue, which is almost $1 million higher than last year. Our expenses also increased, up 3.3% over last year. So, on our government funds, our combined ending fund balance was a total of $8,917,204. It's a decrease of $550,000 across all government funds. So approximately 23% of that is unassigned and available to be spent at the council's discretion. It's interesting that that represents 12.3% of the total government funds expenditures. So everything. So when you talk about that 11%, we're doing well. We have $20,598,134 in long-term debt. That is actually a decrease of a little over $1 million over last year. State law caps what we are allowed, what the council is allowed to borrow, the level council can borrow, and they do it at a percent of the taxable valuation. So as our value changes, that hard number changes. For June 30 of last year, the statute said that we could have a total of 15% of our value in indebtedness, with 7.5%, maximum of 7.5% of that for sewer. We were at 4.85% for the total, so well under the statutory cap, and 1.91% for WPCF. So we are doing very well with the debt. So I have on here my items of interest for council, and this list is not technical, it's just based on the questions that I tend to field. So when you look at statement 3 on page 13 of your financial statements, you will notice that we have fund balance listed. On fund balance, there are actually 5 categories of fund balance, or elements of fund balance. The first is non-spendable prepaid, and those are for expenses that the town made before the end of the fiscal year for services that would be rendered in the next fiscal year. And so oftentimes that is insurances, our items where you have to prepay for the upcoming service term. The new item is non-spendable inventory, and when I took over as treasurer, we changed the way we book the bulk gas and diesel depot, the inventory that is there. We were running that as expense and revenue, and I felt very strongly that it's an asset and we should book it that way, and the auditor agreed, so now it's here. So that $11,000 is not cash to be spent, but rather diesel and gas to be burned. restricted, the restricted is actually on Exhibit A3 on page 54 of the audit. You will see a line by line of what makes up the restricted funds. For us, they're TIF expenditures. They're expenses that council does not have the discretion to simply spend as they wish or reallocate in another manner. And then the assigned on that same exhibit, we have $5.2 million that's been assigned, and you can see in that exhibit exactly what has been assigned in the year-ending balances. And then the unassigned that we have talked a lot about today. So the notes to the financial statements start on page 20, and even if you're not really into numbers, I would encourage folks to just scan through those notes, because it tells you an awful lot about the town and how we do business and how we protect. One of the things that should be of note to council, since you are personally responsible for the funds that we have, is that our $11 million that is on deposit for the government activities and business type activities, it was determined by the auditor to all be there as it should be, and it is not exposed to a custodial credit risk. So we have it adequately secured through either FDIC or collateral agreements with the bank. We have, it also talks about the $333,000 that we have in cemetery, that we have invested for cemetery perpetual care, and it talks about the breakdown of $8,000 of that is in the money market and the rest is in mutual funds, and none of that is exposed to a custodial credit risk. So and finally, of the 2017 property taxes that were levied, what the notes would tell you is that we have gone forward and secured them with liens, so they are secured debt, that we are charging the 7% interest that the council has told us we need to charge, that at year end there was a principal balance outstanding for delinquent accounts of $275,505, which gives us a collection rate of 97.71%, which remains very, very good. So that is my brief 100-foot, and I will be working with the auditors to schedule a workshop that council can come to and talk to them.
So as council members review the audit at your leisure and have questions you'd like the auditors to address when they visit with us, it would be helpful if you could get that information to Sophie so that the auditors will focus on items that are of concern to council members. They'll do a general overview, I'm sure, but it'd be nice to, if you have questions that require some depth, that they come prepared to answer those. Okay? Ready to move on? So the next item is future agenda items or items of concern, and we'll start at the other end of the table tonight. And Megan, any items on your list?
I have none.
Judy?
No.
Tom?
No.
I would like to request possibly just an update on OTO fiber.
That's coming up next month.
Is that in March, February?
I was expecting it next month.
Well, I know February is the next month, so.
That would be February.
Yeah,
Yep.
Okay.
So, thank you.
And I had nothing. Public petitions, we have none. Public comments, I see Mr. Lavelle in the audience, and I think he's here for public comment.
Yes, I am.
Why don't you come up to the microphone, Joe?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
He left.
Joe, for the record, would you state your name and address when you get up there, please?
Sure. My name's Joseph Lavelle. I live at 99 Mill Street in Orono, and happily lived there for 60 years. And I happened to, the other day, at the end of the last council meeting, I had changed from DirecTV to the cable, and I came across the town meeting that you can have public comments, okay? And there's some things I really wanted to share with the council members that have been very helpful to me. The ambulance crew, okay, was very, very helpful to my mother, okay? They came down to my house a few times. They even taken me to the hospital. And the people that were hired to do those jobs were very exceptionally good people, okay? And very qualified, okay? They took the extra time with my mother to find out what was wrong, and they were very good people, all right? Now, I know you're going to say, well, that's what they were hired for, okay? I know you probably think, well, that's what they were hired for, and you would be correct, but they were hired to do this job, but they went above and beyond, okay, their duty, all right? And I just want to say what tremendously good people they are, all right? And I just, on the funny side, I guess you could say, I always speak to the firemen, and but the police, I don't think they know me very well, so I
Probably good.
which is good. I used to wave to them, and try to be nice, but I don't think they know what to expect from me, so I don't do it anymore. Okay, but the firemen and the people that Orno was hired, I know you say, well, that's what they're for, but they do an exceptionally good job. Okay, and I wanted the council to know that, and I have to embarrass one council member. Okay, Tom Perry. Okay, I want to embarrass the heck out of him. Oh, Joe. All right, because I have no family. Most of my family has passed away or gone. Okay. But when my mother was sick, Tom was very helpful to me, okay? I could count on him for help. And he helped me when I was in high school 40 years ago, and he's still helping me now, okay? He's still helping me now, all right? So I wanted to embarrass Tom today, so. But anyway, I just wanted the council people to know the experience I've had with the ambulance and the fire people. The firemen came to my house one day because my mother was worried that the furnace, the water level was going to come up. It didn't. But the firemen come down, was very nice to my mother, and just above and beyond of what they're hired for, okay? So I just wanted to come to say how much I've appreciated the services and the people, that you guys have hired from the town, okay? So, thank you very much.
Joe, thank you for coming up and sharing that information. Appreciate it. Susan?
Hello, Susan Whitmore. Couple comments. My formative background involves a training in being a creative thinker. Sometimes it goes beyond reality. So, does anyone pay attention to license plates, perhaps? A lot of license plates within the state of Maine have the initials V and R. Interesting. Well, a couple of days ago, and I mentioned this to Ms. Wilson, as well as some of the other authorities within Orno, I saw a report from the LA Times, VR, standing for virtual reality. And I just can't help but think of Cambridge, Massachusetts. there was a store entitled The Games People Play. Just as a conceptual thought, conceptual thinkers in creative thinking. Well, that report from Los Angeles also included there's a VR, virtual reality company involving pornography, which has been a very booming industry with the sex dolls and such things. So, that just considering my license plate has VR on it, I find the need to announce in some clarity. I have absolutely no interest in being a community or anyone's porn star. And I find the need to voice such things. I mean, this is a community with a family reputation, lots of married people. And, you know, it's not to say a married person doesn't have such concerns, but I think single people get approached more often with propositions of sexual intent and content. When I was resident of Boston, I used to get approached at least once a week by people looking for a prostitute. And it didn't matter how I was dressed. You know, I could have been dressed or where I was standing, often at the bus stop. On one occasion, on a snowy evening at about midnight, returning from my studio, huge bulky leather coat, bulky sweater, Carhartt pants, giant metal toolbox, and people would still try to proposition me. I chase people from my block with my dog. You know, so I'm not passive about such advances. You know, as interesting as virtual reality is, I'm not interested in the games people might be playing pertaining to such. So absolute clarity. If other people are playing the game and all copacetic with playing the game together, have a blast. And aside from that, Happy New Year.
Same to you, Susan.
Okay. Any other comments? And I think we're ready for a motion to adjourn.
Oh, I got this. So moved.
Second.
We are going to go into a workshop when this meeting is over, and public is welcome to stay if they wish. Anything else? All those in favor of adjourning? Yeah.